But so this is my third book on intuition, and this is really focusing on your sort of wheelhouse, which is physics and the non-local field, and this really sort of no nonsense interpretation of intuition and how it works in our cognitive function. So, the way I've looked at it in this book, the sort of angle we're taking is that it is our quantum intelligence, that with our intuition, we can think non-linearly and we can do all those things that we can't necessarily do here in the physical world because we're sort of thinking with that different part of our brain, the sort of quantum part of our brain. So with that sort of in mind, I'd love to talk with you about your journey into the quantum realm and how it ties in with your experiences with intuition, because I understand that you have a very rich history with channeling and a lot of other really fascinating things with the work you do at the Institute of Noetic Science. So to start off, I'd love to start with your book, The Science of Channeling, right? So was a real inspiration for the Illumination Code. And it's such an intriguing blend of science and spirituality. And one of the things I love that you said was it was sort of like helps people to come out of the spiritual closet into non-local consciousness. So could you tell us a little bit about maybe your experience coming out of the spiritual closet with this stuff and how it all came to be?
Yes, absolutely. It's been such an incredible journey for myself around this. And I'd say most of my life, I really was in the closet. And my journey, I think, began as a young child when I was having intuitive experiences and I didn't quite realize it. I was just very sensitive. If I walked into a room, I'd feel really uncomfortable. If people, weren't feeling good, I could feel their emotions. I was always really afraid of the dark. But now I realize that maybe I was sensing things that I couldn't quite see. And so that was freaking me out as a child. And then when I went to, at 10 years old, I went to my grandparents' house for the first kind of spiritual meeting that was going on weekly throughout my upbringing. And my uncle was a trance channeler. My grandmother was a trance channeler. And then later in life, my mother learned how to be a trance channeler. And so I had this very, very rich spiritualist type upbringing that absolutely affected my worldview. But that was always very hidden. And when you hear about my bio, I'm trained as a naturopathic physician. I have a master's in clinical research. I have this academic background, NIH funded research grants, et cetera. You wouldn't ever understand that the channeling was such a big part of my history. So I did keep that hidden. I only shared it with family and a few friends and such. And it was only when I was invited to the Institute of Noetic Sciences for what they called the Future of Meditation program. They basically brought experts from around the world in meditation research. And I was so grateful to get that invitation. And we were looking at what wasn't being talked about in Western meditation research, the spiritual aspects, the esoteric, psychic aspects. And I was completely flabbergasted that ions could ask these research questions. And I'm like, how can you do this? Because I did not feel like I could do that at my academic university. And that just really inspired me. And I'm like, I'm done having a split life.
Yes.
I really want to be able to marry my personal experience with my professional life. And, it took a couple of years, but it really unfolded in a beautiful synchronistic way for me to join ION's staff. And now I found myself as director of research there and supporting myself and our team doing incredible work on these topics. And so, when I got to IONS, I got so excited to be able to apply my research training to this concept of channeling, which I had no clue that parapsychology had been studying it for over 150 years. So I was just immersed in the literature and just completely blown away. And I created this channeling research program at IONS that kind of builds on the previous work, but it puts it in kind of like a container with 6 different research questions. Things like, how common is it? How does it work? What do we already know? What are its characteristics? Who can do it? Is the content useful, etc.? And I started doing studies on this. I started presenting about it. And at one of our events, someone came up to me and said, you really should write a book about this. And I started laughing. I'm like, oh, no. And I'm like, who's going to publish that? And he said, well, I am. And so I didn't realize that he was, or the founder of New Harbinger book publications.
Wonderful.
And so that was an incredible synchronistic opportunity that led to me writing that book. And to me, the book is so exciting because I envisioned the person reading it, and you kind of gave me this positive feedback that the person could hold it up and be like, look, I'm not alone. This is common. There's research about this, and that it would be a very accessible read for the general public, talking about the vast research that is already out there about these topics.
And it is so needed. And that's why when I was reading your book, I'm like, yes, where have you been all my life? Right. Because this stuff is real. And having, people out there, scientists and people like you that have credibility and are high-minded people, not those kooks that, we usually get lumped into, that are out there just talking about the reality of this really important part of our life that we've just sort of been, culturally taught to push under the carpet. But it's more important than anything else, really, when you get down to it, because it's underneath everything. So it's so valuable that you put that book out. And I love that it was so serendipitous that the universe just kind of plopped that in your lap and made it happen, because that's what happens when we're aligned, right? The door's open. And it really is this perfect book for those of you watching who really want to get out and really understand how things work, right? And just say, okay, so this isn't some crazy activity. There's actually some science behind this when this is going on. And my instincts and my intuitions, there's things that are impressing upon me, like the examples that you gave early on about being afraid of the dark, things like that. It's so, this kind of stuff happens to us all the time, and we just don't understand why. So your book was just such a great resource, is such a great resource of helping people to find that place and really bring our two lives together. I love that, because I felt the same way. It was just, you were living a secret life for so long, and finally you're just like, I can't do it anymore. So you have created a book that is going to help a lot of people do that, I'm sure.
Thank you.
And one of the other things I love, the title is Why You Should Trust Your Intuition and Embrace the Force That Connects Us All. I think that is such a great subtitle. And I actually talk about that in the book, because I was talking about when my grandmother passed, I sensed it and I was like, oh, I felt the disturbance in the force, right? And that was even before I really knew about all this stuff. And yeah, a little Star Wars flavor in there. But I love that you wrap that idea of the force that connects us all. Can you maybe just talk a little bit about that for viewers, about what that is and how it works?
So I love titles and subtitles. And if you've probably experienced this in terms of how do you capture your audience with a title? How do you actually encompass the rich and nuanced, diverse information in a title that's going to grab people? And so this whole aspect of the force that connects us all, I think, was a little bit of marketing to capture people's attention. And I am a huge Star Wars fan. My family and kiddos are all about Star Wars. We have Star Wars everywhere. So I thought that was a really fun title. And it's a little, I don't want to call it misleading, but if you read my book on how channeling works, what's pretty clear is that it's not a force in the physics sense of the word, meaning I don't have laser beams that are shooting out of my eyes that are traveling through time and space to reach someone else, right?
Right.
It's not this physics force that's going from one place to another. And the reason we know that is because often these like telepathic impressions or mind over matter interactions are instantaneous. And it couldn't be a physics force if we're seeing this in an instantaneous way. So it's more, the use of the word force is more like the Star Wars use of it, you know, like there is this interconnected field that connects us all. And that really is the premise that I hold, that we hold at IONS, that we are all interconnected. And when we acknowledge that, it allows us to access information and energy from beyond time and space, which in turn can profoundly amplify innovation, transformation, and well-being. That's the guiding premise, guiding hypothesis at IONS, and which all of our research studies aim to evaluate. So there's growing evidence for this interconnected nature of reality, this underlying interconnected nature. And, you know, you can look at the example of entanglement that has been demonstrated in multiple different labs now around the world, with many different objects, from photons to even larger molecules called buckyballs. There have even been some diamonds, specialized diamonds that they've shown to be entangled, and even light from quasars that are, you know, millions, billions of miles away. So what do we mean by entanglement? Imagine that you take two photons and you entangle them in some way. And you take one of those and move it, you know, 3,000 miles away. So you could move photon A in a certain direction, and instantaneously, so no difference in time, photon B would move in the same direction. So they are intrinsically interconnected. And the idea, in a very kind of general sense, is that, you know, we were all entangled at the Big Bang. So, you know, perhaps from our human perspective, we don't perceive things that way because we feel separate, and, you know, I can take an action and, you know, not have it instantaneously affect other people. And yet we're seeing from multiple different disciplines of science that this kind of entanglement actually exists on multiple different levels.
It is so exciting. And I love that you wrapped in the Big Bang with it, right? Because that's something that people don't always talk about. But the fact that we were all one once, right? And we somehow came apart, and there's still that little part of us that are still pinging each other and still sort of knows what's going on beyond time and space. I love that. And I think entanglement is really one of the most powerful explanations for so many things that we experience, right? Like when you pick up the phone just as someone's going to call you, or you think of someone and they email you the next day, like that happens to everybody. And like, you can't just say it's coincidence, because it happens too much. It's beyond coincidence. And so I think it's one of the things that is so obvious in our life that we experience regularly. We just never had a real scientific explanation. And sure, we're still at the particle level, but there's definitely, right, a reason behind saying that, you know, if these photons are entangled, and, you know, we're bodies of light, that there's parts of our minds that are entangled as well. So it all sort of starts to make sense of this phenomenon that's been a mystery for so long in the world. So I love that. And I think it also ties into this idea of noetic. Can we talk about that term? That's a term that you use a lot. And that I love the root, you know, it's a Greek word of inner wisdom and intuition and all of that stuff. So it really is this sort of intuitive knowing that the Institute of Noetic Sciences, IONS, as you've heard her refer to, they focus on that. You guys do amazing things, courses, classes, all kind of research, really some great stuff going on there. But I just kind of wanted to talk about this idea of having noetic experiences. And I think a lot of people out there have had these noetic experiences and have not known what to do with them. So you tell me like a little bit, just maybe a little bit more about, just real quick, about the kinds of stuff that you're doing there, the research, the sort of new frontiers that you guys are crossing right now?
Yes. So you described noetic quite beautifully. And it really is this sense of inner knowing without a kind of rational way for why our intellect would know that. So often people will experience it as like, I just know this is true. I just know it's true. You have a very clear felt sense that something is true, but there's really no way you could have possibly known whether it's true or not true,
Right.
but you just know that it is. And so one area of research that I'd like to share with you is about what we're calling the noetic signature. And like I
That was my
mentioned,
next question. See, you're using your intuition. Tell us all
well,
about it. Yes.
yes, I will tell you all about it. Before I do, though, I want to share that there are so many terms that we are ascribing to this experience. And, when I first entered this field, I was like, kind of blown away and confused. And well, so and so calls it this. And so what's it? Tuition? Is it noetic? Is it channeling? Is it ESP? Is it psychic? Like, why do we have all these terms for these experiences? And I think it's the human mind trying to put a label on something it doesn't quite understand. And often these experiences are ineffable, meaning that we can't really describe them with words.
Yes.
And so language, we can get definitely tripped up on language in terms of studying these phenomena. So we at IONS created another term, of course, called the noetic signature, that perhaps has less taboos than ESP or psychic or channeling, etc. And it's framed in this context that, this proposal that we all have an innate ability to access this inner wisdom, but that the way that we do it is unique to us. And so the noetic signature is about discovering our unique expression of this inner wisdom. And not that one expression is better than the other, but just to really normalize, acknowledge, and value all the different expressions of our noetic signature. So we began with a qualitative study with over 500 people, and we basically asked them, how do you access information and energy from beyond time and space? How do you express that? And we had them write in as much detail as possible. We tried not to use all the old terms, and we wanted to just start from a fresh slate. Those 500 people wrote out a ton of information, and we used qualitative analysis to pull out the various themes. From that, we created a 350 item questionnaire, which we narrowed down to 175 items, which we narrowed down again through statistical analysis. We gave that large 175 questionnaire to over 1,000 people, and then we crunched the data, and then we did it again, and we ended up with a 44 item questionnaire that's basically pulling apart the most common experiences, the most common expressions of this noetic signature. And what's so fascinating about this work is that it really distilled down to 12 different characteristics. And one of those is what we just talked about, this we call maybe general intuition, that has 3 flavors. One is, I just know it. I just know that it's true. The second flavor is, I just feel it. I just feel that it's true. And the third flavor is actually feeling other people's emotions, the feeling sense. So that was the largest characteristic that described most of the variability of the data set. But there were 11 others, like actually getting tingles or getting specific physical sensations when we are getting true information, receiving information through dreams,
Mm.
being able to touch an object and get
Psychometry.
information from it, being a mediumship, so having communication with apparent non-physical beings, healing. So we have these 12 characteristics that kind of make up this noetic signature. And so your audience is welcome to go to our website, nsi.noetic.org, to take this questionnaire. It's really a tool of discovery, personal discovery, to see where your expression lies on these 12 different characteristics. And we're doing research now to see if there's patterns between those 12. So if I have noetic information that shows up for me in my dreams, do I also get goosebumps or something like that?
Right.
I'm just giving some random example. So it's a really wonderful way to allow people to have discussion, conversation, and explore their own expressions of these capacities.
I love that, and I think we are definitely going to be sending some people your way to take that test, because that's one of the things. So I run an intuition development school called Intuition Lab, and so we sort of focus on the same ideas. And it's so interesting that your research really backs up the exact kind of model that we've kind of come up with intuitively. So I think it's really neat that there's this alignment, because one of the first things we wanted to do too is really think about how we talk about things. And I love that you guys are trying to change the language, right? Because we can't use that same kind of language that has all of this sort of pejorative associations with it. And we really need a new way of talking about it. So I love this introduction of some new terminology that can help us to get rid of the stigma and really approach things with a really common sense point of view. And when people are starting to understand their intuition, I'm sure they're the same way. One of the things everyone says, well, like, how do I know what my intuition is versus what my intuition isn't, right? So understanding your unique noetic signature can be so helpful, because you understand these different sort of ways that you get intuitive impressions. And in Intuition Lab, we just basically kind of boil it down to the same thing, which is through your mind, through your heart, your emotions, or through your body, right? So those are and then you sort of have this sort of metaphysical realm of spirit, sort of body, mind, heart, and spirit, which I think really aligns with, what you guys found in terms of those main core groups, because it's sort of like that information touches us in the same way we can receive any other information, right? Through thoughts or feelings or sensations. And then you just kind of find, your own kind of way, like, oh, I tend to get sort of physical feelings or empathy, or I, have different sort of senses where I just know things, right? Everybody is different and unique. So yeah, I will post that link so that folks can go check it out, because what self-awareness is really the key. Once we understand that these things are real and how they're actually happening, will help us to foster them and trust them. So fantastic. Thank you for sharing that link. And I was literally, it's so funny, you preempted, and that was going to be my next question. And how I was going to say, so where do they go? And then you got me on that one too. So this is great alignment for us today. So we're going to wrap up in 1 minute. I just want to ask you one more question before we head out. If you have anything to share with folks, your favorite sort of intuition tip or any practice to help them get into that sort of noetic zone and experience that a little more in their life.
I think my tip for your audience is more of an attitude rather than a tip, because, I feel like everyone's path to get into that state can be so varied, whether it's if you like sitting, if you need to move your body, etc. But that the attitude that we bring to this work is so incredibly important. And I find that the greatest success comes from people who are open, who are curious, and above all, who love themselves and are willing to be patient with the process and its unfoldment, to understand that there is no one right way, and that you are really on this beautiful process of discovering your own way. and to just really love yourself through each step of that, and be like a little kid filled with joy and excitement of what you're going to discover next, in nurturing your intuition in a way that will support you and your family and your friends, and ripple out from there to really create a beautiful impact in the world.
Amen. Wow.